This is the piece we're going to be working on. It's a vase that's 19 inches across here, 9 inches across at the base, 9 inches across at the top, and about 24-25 inches long. This is only the third section piece I've ever done. This here is the first one. Kind of a funny looking thing. It didn't turn out very good. The wood wasn't very good. But what I was really experimenting with in this piece was making sure that I could get my rings tight enough to actually do section turning and kind of practice building it up versus actually producing something. So this kind of just sits around the shop, collects dust, and reminds me that I can do section turning if I really put the effort forth. So we're going to be doing this turning out of some maple, hard maple, that I've had laying around the shop for some time. My plan was going to be a glue-up bench top with this, but when I start to go through the stack of it, it was kind of dried poorly, and it has a lot of warps and bends and things like that to it, which make gluing it up really difficult. However, when you cut it into kind of these sticks like this that we're going to be doing the section pieces out of, the warps and bends don't really matter as much. Okay, so here's the first ring cut out of the maple. This ring is supposed to be 9 inches in diameter, so we'll see where it nets out once I put the bands around it. I did cut out a test ring out of some scrap wood that I had laying around just to test the bands I was using, as well as make sure the angle on my saw was right. I don't think I'm going to need any shims or to do these in half rings and then sand the edges flat and then bring them together. I think I'll be able to glue them up whole. But we're going to test this one out before we put any glue on it, so let's do that now. Okay, so there it is. It's relatively flat. Alright, next step is to put glue on it, then put it back together, make sure it's nice and flat, and let it set to dry. Okay, here's the second ring. It's 12¼ inches, which is not what I planned for size-wise. 12¼ will actually fit somewhere right here. So I'm going to have to get a little bit more accurate on determining how big the ring's going to be based on the size of the piece. Okay, so as I glue the rings up, I was originally doing that on the lathe and kind of using it as a clamp. Here's the glue up so far, and I developed this method where I would take a ring and put in 2 pins here and about here, and then kind of use that to hang it centered up on the lathe while I bring that piece of plywood up and smashed it. So I showed you that method. And the issue with that method is it just takes a really long time because you only really do 1 ring at a time and keep them centered up. They kind of float around in there and squeeze out. So what I'm going to try and do is do maybe 4 or 5 rings and then add those on, and then I'll be able to continue with the turning. I already did a little bit of turning right here. The T-pins worked really great for that, but I don't have any more of those, or only have a limited number of them. So I'm going to use these wire brads instead. Put them in here. First I eyeball it, and then I put the brads in at 3 different locations, and that gives me the ability to kind of put glue on the ring and then just set it on there and have it directly where it needs to go. Get them stacked up where I need them, match mark them, and then I'll be ready to glue, and hopefully they'll all stay centered up. Okay, so I got them all glued up. The method worked pretty good. I like the nails. Really help you figure out where it's going to be. I did sand these rings down on my friend's drum sander. It's 18 inches wide, so I was able to sand them down up to like the 17-inch diameter ring. But then we tried to sand some of the bigger rings through there, and we actually broke one of the sanding belts in there off the drum. I think it got caught where it goes into the drums. But now I'm going to have to sand these larger rings all the way on the disc on the lathe. So it makes a lot of dust. Okay, so this is progress so far on the vase. I've managed to cut all but about 2 rings. I'm actually going to de-stack it and show you guys something related to the 19-inch rings that I'm going to have to re-sand because I messed up 2 of them, and they've got some pretty big gaps on the inside that you can see from the inside. So let me number these, de-stack them, and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so this is the issue with some of the 19-inch rings. You can see right here there is a pretty big gap right in between these 2 rings, right there at the seam and kind of back along this way. If I look at that same spot on the other side, however, though, it's really tight. That's the same gap right there. There's no gap, essentially, and the rings are compressed against each other. So I'm going to show you why that happened. Just pull this back. You can see this burn mark right here. And that burn mark is present on most of the 19-inch rings, where this part of the ring is actually lower now than this part of the ring out there. And it's from where the ring was kind of lopsided on the 18-inch sanding disc, and it was burning itself on the plywood. So this is what the sanding disc looks like after I ran the 19-inch rings on it, and it just wore the sandpaper right off the edge of the sanding disc. So what we're going to do now is we are going to make a new sanding disc that is about 22 inches in diameter, and we're going to use the outboard side of the lathe to do the turning on these 19-inch rings and just sand that away. So I got myself some 60 grit sandpaper. Well, it says 60/80. I don't know what that means, but I'm hoping it's more like 8. It feels more like 80 to me. Doesn't feel like 60. 60 is pretty rough. I now realize what they mean on the package when they write 60/80 on here. They mean there are 2 sheets of 60 and 2 sheets of 80. So I might be the first idiot ever to make a sanding disc with 2 different crits on it. 80, 80, 60. We'll see how it goes. One thing I found while I was trying to turn the vase when it's sticking out 13 inches or so like this is I really have to have something up here on the tailstock. Otherwise the rings vibrate a lot more than a solid piece of wood. So I found that what I did is I turned my sanding disc around, my smaller one, and butt it up against here. That helps a lot. This piece here is going to be the very top of the base, and I'm going to work my way backwards and then mate up with the bottom piece, and then I'll glue those two pieces together to have the final base and then do the final shaping on the outside. So we've kind of transitioned now from working on the bottom of the base to working on the top of the base. This might not be a good idea, I don't know. I'm just having trouble with all the vibration in the bottom of the base, and I'm thinking that if I can start working on the top, I'll limit the length down, and then once I can bring the two together, I can just do one final turning with it captured on both ends and not have to worry about all that vibration when I'm doing the inside. Good. Start gluing it up. So here I've got the top rim, the next ring, and then the subsequent rings for the top of the vase. So this is going to be the top here. This ring's not glued in. This seems to me to be a lot easier than clamping the rings together with clamps like I did on the bottom piece. So this is the method I'm going to try and use to finish up the rest of these.